They say stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence, it's the rejection of wisdom. Because the real fool isn't the one who doesn't know, it's the one who refuses to learn. In every era, from the Stoic philosophers of Rome to the modern world of noise and opinions, there's been one constant truth. Wisdom is quiet, and foolishness is loud. A fool will argue for hours to protect his pride. A wise person stays silent long enough to understand. But here's the danger. Stupidity doesn't always look stupid. It wears the mask of confidence. It speaks with certainty. It pretends to know everything. And that's why it's so deadly, because when a person stops questioning themselves, they stop growing. Marcus Aurelius once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." That single idea defines the difference between the fool and the thinker. A fool is obsessed with being right. The wise are obsessed with finding the truth. And in a world that rewards arrogance, pretension, and superficial noise, real wisdom has become rebellion. Look around you. You'll find fools everywhere. In classrooms, acting like they're too smart to listen. In workplaces, blaming everyone but themselves. On social media, mistaking attention for intelligence. And maybe, sometimes even inside ourselves. Because stupidity isn't always permanent. It's a state we slip into when our ego blinds us. We all have moments where pride drowns curiosity, where emotion replaces reason. But the goal of Stoic thinking is to catch those moments, to notice when foolishness takes the wheel, and to regain control before it drives our life into regret. This video isn't about mocking others. It's about mastery, understanding what separates the wise from the foolish. Because once you can recognize the signs of stupidity, both in others and within yourself, you become immune to it. So, let's strip away the illusions. Let's talk about the 6 signs that reveal the true nature of foolishness. The habits, the mindsets, and the attitudes that destroy self-awareness, respect, and growth. This isn't philosophy in theory, it's philosophy in survival. Because in the real world, wisdom isn't just about reading Seneca or quoting Marcus Aurelius. It's about living differently. And that starts with knowing what not to become. The first and most dangerous sign of stupidity is a closed mind. Not a lack of information, but the refusal to accept new information. A closed mind builds walls, not windows. It lives in a small room of certainty and calls it truth. It says, "I already know, I don't need to learn." But every time a person says that, life quietly closes another door of opportunity. The fool doesn't realize how much they don't know. They mistake familiarity for wisdom. They confuse confidence with competence. And slowly they build a prison made of their own ego, a place where growth becomes impossible. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. For I seek the truth, not to be right." That line separates the wise from the foolish. The wise person wants to be challenged. The fool fears it. Because when your identity depends on being right, every correction feels like an attack. That's why the closed-minded are always defensive. Not because they're sure, but because they're insecure. They interrupt others mid-sentence. They reject feedback before hearing it. They scroll past anything that challenges their beliefs. And then they wonder why life keeps teaching them the same lessons in harsher ways. Here's a truth no one likes to hear. A closed mind doesn't protect you. It limits you. It keeps you comfortable, yes, but also small. It's like staying in the same room your entire life because you're afraid the next door might reveal something that forces you to grow. The Stoics believe that wisdom begins with humility, the understanding that you might be wrong. And that's where true strength lives. Because the moment you admit you don't know everything, the universe starts teaching you. Look at children, they learn faster than adults because they're curious, not proud. They don't pretend to already know. But somewhere along the way, pride replaces curiosity, and people start valuing appearing smart more than becoming wise. That's why foolishness spreads so easily in our time. Everyone wants to speak. No one wants to listen. Everyone wants to be the teacher. No one wants to be the student. Yet the strongest people you'll ever meet are learners forever. They know that every person, every experience, even every mistake, has something to teach them. So if you ever want to know whether someone is growing or decaying, don't look at their achievements. Look at their attitude toward learning. The wise say, "Teach me." The fool says, "I already know." And the most ironic part? The world doesn't punish the fool immediately. It lets them walk in circles full of pride until time itself reveals what they've missed. So if you want to live differently, keep your mind open, even when it hurts your ego, even when it challenges your comfort. Because truth doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in curiosity. That's the first sign of a stupid person. They fear learning. They confuse pride for intelligence, and in doing so, they bury their potential under the weight of their own certainty. But the wise, they remain students, even when they're masters, because they know the moment you stop learning, you stop living. The second sign of a stupid person is their obsession with blame. They can't live without a villain. Every failure, every setback, every disappointment always has someone else's name on it. To the fool, the world is never fair because they never take responsibility. They will spend their entire life pointing fingers, never realizing that every time they do, they give away their power. Seneca once wrote, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." The fool is always being dragged by circumstances, by emotions, by excuses, because they believe life happens to them, not through them. You'll notice something about people who blame. Their stories never change. The characters might shift, a boss today, a friend tomorrow, fate itself next week, but the plot stays the same. It's not my fault. The problem with that mindset isn't just immaturity, it's weakness. Because when you blame others, you remove your ability to change anything. You trap yourself in a role where you can only complain, never correct. Blame is comfort disguised as logic. It gives the illusion of understanding without the pain of accountability. That's why fools love it. It lets them feel wise while staying stuck. But wisdom demands ownership. It forces you to look at the harsh truth. Sometimes you are the problem. Not the only problem, but part of it. And unless you face that part, you'll never break the pattern. A fool spends years repeating the same mistakes, convinced the universe is unfair. The wise person pauses after failure and asks, "What did I do to allow this?" That single question changes everything, because responsibility isn't about guilt, it's about power. When you take responsibility, you gain control. You shift from victim to student. You turn pain into feedback. The fool can't do that. Their ego won't let them. To admit fault feels like death to their pride. So they lie to themselves instead and call it peace. But inside they know. They feel the quiet shame of someone who keeps running from the same mirror. The Stoics taught that every obstacle is a lesson, every hardship a teacher. If you keep meeting the same kind of failure, it's not bad luck. It's an unlearned lesson knocking again. Blaming others won't stop it. Learning from it will. In the modern world, blame has become entertainment. We see it online every day. Everyone pointing fingers, no one taking responsibility. People build entire identities around victimhood because it's easier to complain than to change. But here's the truth. Life doesn't reward the loudest complainer. It rewards the quiet learner. You can spend your energy proving you're not at fault, or you can spend it becoming stronger. The fool chooses the first. The wise choose the second. So ask yourself, when something goes wrong, what's your first instinct? Do you search for someone to accuse, or do you look within first? That answer reveals more about your strength than any words could. Because maturity isn't measured by age or education. It's measured by accountability. And every time you say, "I could have handled that better," you evolve. Every time you say, "It's their fault," you stay exactly where you are. That's the tragedy of the fool. They spend a lifetime running from responsibility, only to realize in the end that the person they were running from was themselves. The third sign of a foolish person is arrogance. That quiet poison that kills wisdom before it can even grow. Arrogance wears many masks. It can look like confidence, like charm, even like success. But underneath it hides fear. The fear of being wrong, of being questioned, of being seen as ordinary. Fools confuse arrogance with strength. They believe that to appear powerful, they must never admit weakness. So they build walls of superiority, tall, loud, and fragile. But the higher they build those walls, the smaller they become inside them. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus once said, "It is impossible to learn what one thinks one already knows." That is the curse of the arrogant. They stop learning because they believe they've already arrived. They enter every room needing to prove they're the smartest one there. They speak more than they listen. They argue not to understand, but to win. And they measure their worth by how many people they can silence, rather than how many they can uplift. But the wise know something the arrogant never will. True intelligence speaks softly. It doesn't shout to be heard. It whispers through action, through humility, through curiosity. Have you ever met someone who always interrupts mid-sentence, who nods impatiently, waiting for their turn to talk? That's not confidence, that's insecurity disguised as dominance. They fear silence because silence might expose their emptiness. The arrogant live for recognition, but the humble live for growth. And that difference defines the entire direction of a life. Let's be honest, humility isn't glamorous. It doesn't get applause or validation, but it's the foundation of mastery. Because every time you humble yourself, you open the door to learning. The fool closes that door and locks it from the inside. They mistake certainty for wisdom, but certainty is static and wisdom is alive. It evolves, questions, and adjusts. Think about how many opportunities are lost because people can't say 5 simple words. I might be wrong about that. The fool can't utter them. Their ego won't allow it. But the wise person says it easily, because they don't fear being wrong. They fear staying ignorant. Arrogance isolates, humility connects. When you walk into a room believing you can learn from everyone, even the quietest voice can change your life. But when you believe you already know everything, even the greatest teacher will sound like noise. That's why arrogant people often end up alone, surrounded not by equals, but by silence. Because people stop trying to teach those who refuse to listen. Wisdom thrives on humility because humility keeps you open. Open to correction, to new ideas, to the evolution of your own soul. And without that openness, you might achieve success, but never peace. The Stoics taught that the wise man doesn't boast of his wisdom. He demonstrates it through composure, kindness, and restraint. He doesn't need to dominate because he already governs himself. So whenever you feel the urge to prove yourself, pause. Am I trying to learn or trying to win? Because if it's the latter, you've already lost. Remember this. Arrogance builds noise, humility builds depth. Arrogance inflates the ego. Humility expands the soul. Arrogance says, "Look at me." Humility says, "Let me learn." And only one of those paths leads to true wisdom. The fourth sign of a foolish person is the absence of empathy. A heart so focused on itself that it forgets how to feel for others. A fool might be clever with words, skilled in logic, or even successful in the world's eyes. But without empathy, all of it rings hollow. Empathy is the bridge between minds. It's what allows us to see beyond ourselves, to understand pain that isn't our own, to comfort wounds we'll never feel firsthand. And when that bridge collapses, people become islands, isolated, defensive, and lost. Fools don't understand this. They mistake sensitivity for weakness, compassion for naivety. They think strength means being unshaken by others' suffering. But that's not strength, that's emptiness dressed as control. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." He meant that humanity is one body, hurt one part, and the rest feels it too. But the fool, blind in their arrogance, believes they stand apart. Untouched, independent, invincible. You can recognize them easily. They dismiss emotions as drama. They mock vulnerability. They roll their eyes when someone cries. To them, empathy is inconvenient. It slows them down, demands patience, demands heart. But without empathy, life becomes mechanical. Actions without meaning, success without soul. Let me tell you something profound. People never forget how you made them feel. Long after your words fade, your emotional presence, or your absence, remains. The fool doesn't realize that. They live as if relationships are transactions. They give when it benefits them and withdraw when it costs them comfort. And then they wonder why trust dies around them. Empathy is not just kindness and it's wisdom. It's the ability to perceive the unseen, the silent exhaustion in someone's voice, the hesitation behind their smile. To feel that and respond with understanding is to possess emotional intelligence, something no book or degree can teach. The Stoics never rejected emotion, they refined it. They taught us not to be ruled by feelings, but to honor them, both ours and others, because the heart, when guided by reason, becomes a source of profound strength. The fool, however, rejects the heart entirely, and in doing so loses a part of what makes them human. They'll say, "I don't have time for people's feelings." But one day, life will humble them. It always does. Because sooner or later, pain comes for everyone, and when it does, they'll crave the same understanding they once denied others. Empathy isn't a weakness in its awareness. It's what keeps us human in a world that worships efficiency and ego. It's what turns pain into connection and mistakes into forgiveness. So the next time someone shares their struggle, listen. Really listen. Don't rush to fix, don't try to compare, just understand. Because in that moment, you aren't just helping them. You're shaping your own soul into something wiser, deeper, and kinder. Remember, the fool sees the world through judgment. The wise see it through compassion. One isolates, the other heals. And if you want to walk the path of true wisdom, you must first learn the language of empathy, the quiet, sacred art of feeling without fear. The fifth sign of a foolish person is their fear of change, the quiet, invisible prison they build around themselves and call stability. Fools love the familiar. They cling to it, protect it, and worship it, even when it no longer serves them, because to them, comfort feels safer than growth. And that's where their decline begins. You see, change is life's only constant. The seasons shift, the rivers flow, the body ages, the world transforms. But the fool resists, as if their refusal could stop time itself. They'll say things like, "I've always done it this way," or "I don't see the point in changing now." But what they don't realize is that everything they cling to is already fading. The Stoics embraced change as a teacher, not a threat. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "Observe constantly that all things take place by change." Because to resist change is to resist life itself. Fools fear the unknown, while the wise make peace with uncertainty. To them, the unknown is not chaos and its potential. The fool, however, builds their comfort zone like a coffin, lined with predictability, sealed with routine, and buried in fear. They don't live, they repeat, day after day, year after year, rehearsing the same habits and calling it security. But comfort is deceptive, whispers, "You're safe here," while quietly stealing your courage, your curiosity, your hunger for more. When you fear change, you stop evolving. And when you stop evolving, life stops speaking to you. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because life is cruel, but because they refuse to move when life invites them forward. Growth is uncomfortable, yes. It asks you to leave behind what's easy, to step into what's unknown. But every great transformation begins with a single act of courage. The decision to outgrow your old self. Think of fire. Destroys, but it also renews. It burns away what's dead to make space for what's alive. Change works the same way. The fool sees only the destruction. The wise see the rebirth. When the Stoics faced hardship, they didn't pray for comfort. They prayed for strength, for perspective, for resilience, because they knew that change, even painful change, refines the soul. Ask yourself, how many opportunities have you lost because you waited for the right time? How many times has fear disguised itself as logic? How many doors have you refused to open simply because they looked unfamiliar? The truth is, the right time doesn't exist. Life rewards those who move, not those who wait. Fools wait for certainty. The wise act with faith. And when you start to see change not as a threat but as a teacher, everything transforms. Your failures, your heartbreaks, even your losses become messengers, not enemies. Remember, the world will change whether you want it to or not. The question is, will you change with it, or will you be left behind, clinging to yesterday? The fool resists, shouting, "Why is this happening to me?" The wise whispers, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single difference defines two very different lives. So if life is pushing you, move. If it's closing a door, let it close. If it's forcing you into discomfort, lean in. Because everything you truly want, growth, strength, peace, lives just beyond the walls of your comfort zone. The sixth and final sign of a foolish person is talking more than listening. A sound so constant it drowns out truth itself. Fools love the echo of their own voice. They speak not to connect, but to dominate. Not to learn, but to be heard. They mistake volume for value and noise for knowledge. But the wisest people you'll ever meet are rarely the loudest ones. They don't rush to fill silence. They sit inside it. They listen, because silence to them is not emptiness. It's space for understanding. A fool fears silence. It makes them feel unseen, unimportant. So they talk and talk and talk, hoping their words will make them matter. But wisdom doesn't live in the mouth. It lives in the pause between sentences. It lives in the space where listening happens. There's a story about Socrates, one of the fathers of philosophy. A student once asked him, "Why do you always listen more than you speak?" Socrates smiled and said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." The fool reverses that ratio. They have 2 ears, but they use neither. They interrupt. They assume. They talk over others, convinced that listening is submission. But listening isn't weakness, it's awareness. It's the discipline of holding space for truth that isn't yours. Think about it. How many conflicts, friendships, or opportunities have been lost simply because someone refused to listen? Not because they didn't care, but because their ego needed to be right. The fool wants attention. The wise want understanding. The fool says, "I already know." The wise ask, "What can I learn?" And that small difference, that single act of humility, separates ignorance from evolution. When you listen, truly listen, something sacred happens. The world starts to reveal itself to you. You begin to see patterns, feel meaning, sense truth. Listening is how you hear not just words, but intentions, emotions, and life itself. But talking without listening, that's how we drown in our own noise. The fool doesn't notice that people slowly stop sharing with them. They stop confiding, stop trusting, stop trying. Because why speak to someone who only waits for their turn to reply? In time, the talker becomes lonely, surrounded by sound but starving for connection. The Stoics warned of this. They taught that speech should serve truth, not vanity. That words should be few, deliberate, and honest. That wisdom grows in silence, not in chatter. So if you want to test your wisdom, don't measure your vocabulary. Measure your silence. See how long you can truly listen without interrupting, correcting, or drifting away. That's not easy, but it's the mark of strength, because anyone can speak. But only the strong can stay silent long enough to understand. The fool fills space with noise. The wise fill it with presence. Remember this. Talking makes noise, listening creates connection. Talking demands attention. Listening earns respect. Talking feeds ego. Listening nurtures wisdom. If you learn to master your tongue, you'll master your peace. And when you do, you'll realize that silence was never empty. It was full of answers you were too loud to hear. We began this journey by pointing at others. The arrogant, the blaming, the rigid, the loud. The ones we call foolish. But now at the end, it's time to turn the mirror around. Because the truth is, every one of us has been that fool. In moments of pride, in arguments we should have walked away from, in times when we wanted to be right more than we wanted to be wise. The fool isn't a person. It's a place we visit, and some people just never leave. But the moment you recognize foolishness within yourself, you are no longer the fool. You are the observer, and that's where transformation begins. The Stoics never aimed to appear perfect. They aimed to be aware, to catch themselves in the act of ignorance and choose better the next time. That's all wisdom really is. Not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to learn from them quickly and deeply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm mistaken, I will gladly change. For I seek the truth which never harmed anyone." That's the essence of strength. Not defending your flaws, but surrendering them to growth. So maybe being stupid isn't the problem. Staying that way is. If arrogance blinds you, choose humility. If you keep blaming others, choose accountability. If your mind feels closed, open it. If you talk too much, learn silence. If you lack empathy, start seeing others as part of yourself. If you resist learning, remind yourself that the wisest man still learns daily. You don't need to be perfect to be wise. You just need to stay awake, because every fool is asleep, lost in noise, pride, and reaction. But the wise, they wake up. They see themselves clearly, and that sight alone changes everything. Wisdom is not a crown you wear. It's a practice you live. It's humility in success, patience in chaos, and awareness in silence. When you begin to notice your own foolishness, when you stop laughing at others and start questioning yourself, you're not falling behind, you're finally catching up. So take this as your moment of awakening. Not to judge, but to grow. Not to appear smart, but to become real. Because in the end, intelligence impresses people, but wisdom transforms you. And when you begin to live wisely, you won't need to prove anything anymore. Your peace will speak for you. Your silence will defend you. Your presence will teach louder than your words ever could. The fool reacts. The wise fool speaks. The wise listens. The fool blames. The wise transforms. And that's the journey from noise to stillness, from ignorance to awareness, from being lost to finally seeing. So remember, you will meet fools every day, but don't let one of them be the person in your mirror. Grow, listen, leer, and let every act of wisdom, however small, be your quiet rebellion against the world's noise. Because the world doesn't need more clever people. It needs more clear ones. And that clarity, that stillness, that strength is what Stoicism has been teaching all along. If you felt something while watching this, if a part of you paused, reflected, or recognized yourself in these words, don't just scroll away. That feeling you have right now is awareness, and awareness is the first step toward wisdom. So before you move on, take a second, breathe, and ask yourself, which of these 6 signs shows up in me the most? Because if you can name it, you can change it. And that's what this channel is here for. To help you see yourself more clearly, to help you think deeper, to help you become stronger. Here, we don't chase noise. We chase meaning. We seek peace over pride, truth over validation, and wisdom over applause. So if that's the path you're on, you belong here. Subscribe. Join this circle of stillness. Every week we uncover more of the hidden lessons the Stoics left behind, so you can master your emotions, control your mind, and live with unshakable strength. Because the world may stay loud, but you don't have to. You can be the quiet one who listens, the calm one who observes, the wise one who acts when it matters, and stays silent when it doesn't. And maybe, just maybe, that's how the world changes. One clear, calm, disciplined mind at a time. Until next time, stay grounded, stay aware, and remember, silence is not weakness, it's power under control.